You might be surprised to learn just how much power a simple comma has. From changing the meaning of a sentence to revealing subtle differences in your writing, the comma is more than just a punctuation mark. It's a tool for powerful communication. Let me explain just how important a comma can be. This sentence says, "Let's eat, Grandma." This sentence says, "Let's eat, Grandma." There's a big difference between these two sentences. The first sentence means we want to eat Grandma. I would not recommend that. The second sentence with a comma is telling Grandma that we want to start eating. Punctuation saves lives. Here's another example. If you cook, John will do the dishes. This sentence sounds like if you cook John. If we put a comma after the word cook, then we can read it this way. If you cook, John will do the dishes. We need the comma to be able to read the sentence correctly. Here's one more example. While we were eating, a dog approached our picnic table. Again, we need a comma in this sentence as well. While we were eating, a dog approached our picnic table. I think you can see that a comma is very important in a sentence to help you understand what is being said. So the main purpose of a comma is to separate elements in a sentence. Commas are commonly used in compound sentences, lists, and inserted phrases. Let's look at a few ways that we use commas. Use a comma before a coordinating conjunction. Here's an example. He enjoyed many parts of France, but his favorite was Paris. Here we have two complete sentences. He enjoyed many parts of France. His favorite was Paris. These two sentences are connected by a coordinating conjunction, the word but. We need to use a comma before the coordinating conjunction. Here's one more example. The tickets were expensive, so I was not able to afford it. Again, we have two complete sentences that are connected by a coordinating conjunction, and we need a comma before the coordinating conjunction. These types of sentences are called compound sentences. You must use a comma before a coordinating conjunction in a compound sentence. Another common way commas are used are in lists. I need to buy apples, bananas, and oranges. You can see that we have placed two commas in our list. In U.S. English, the standard way of using commas in a list is to add this last comma to the list. However, for those in other countries, such as Great Britain, the standard way is not to add a comma at the end of the list. Be sure to follow whatever standard you are using. Here's another example. He traveled to Germany, Switzerland, and France during his summer vacation. Again, you can see the commas between the words in the list. You can also use commas between phrases that are part of a list in a sentence, as in this sentence. He decided he wanted to read his book, take a short nap, and then begin his homework. You also want to use a comma after an introductory word group. When Betty was on her way to school, she saw her friend. When we have an introductory word group at the beginning of the sentence, as in this example, we need to put a comma after the phrase. Here's another example. Near the entrance to the building, they discovered a suspicious package. You also want to use a comma between coordinate adjectives, not joined by the word and. The company has produced an inexpensive, highly efficient printing machine. We could write the sentence in this way. The company has produced an inexpensive and highly efficient printing machine. If we leave the word "and" out of the sentence, we will need a comma between the two coordinate adjectives. Here's one more example. Tom has become a strong, confident, independent young man. It would be possible to write this sentence like this. Tom has become a strong and confident and independent young man. However, in this next example, we cannot write the word "and" between our two adjectives because they're not coordinate adjectives. Grandfather sat in an old rocking chair. We cannot say grandfather sat in an old and rocking chair. We do not need a comma here. One more way that we use commas is to set off non-restrictive elements. We do not use commas to set off restrictive elements. Let me explain. His manager, who lives in Chicago, is visiting the office tomorrow. We are using commas in this sentence because the phrase is a non-restrictive element. We do not need that information to have the sentence convey the meaning that we want to make. We know exactly who this manager is. It is his manager. We just want to add some more information. In this case, we will put commas on both sides of the phrase. Now look at this sentence. The manager who lives in Chicago is visiting the office tomorrow. Perhaps there are several managers, so we might not know which manager it is without saying the information about where he lives. There may be another manager who lives in a different city. By adding the restrictive element, in other words, we need this information to convey the correct information in our sentence, we will not use commas. If the phrase is necessary to give the total information about what you want to say, do not add commas. A few more ways that we use commas are with adjective clauses and inserted phrases. The profits for the year, which were better than last year, were a welcome experience. In this sentence, the adjective clause, which were better than last year, needs to have commas before and after to be correct in this sentence. Here's another example. The company president, Mr. Smith, was away on a business trip. We have added the phrase Mr. Smith to explain who the company president is. In this case, we need to add our two commas. One more example. Mr. Smith, the company president, was away on a business trip. The inserted phrase needs to have a comma before and after. We also need to use commas to set off transition words. Susan did not want to leave. However, her father insisted it was time to go. You can see that we have used a comma after the transition word, however. Here's another example. As a matter of fact, Switzerland has some of the highest mountains in the world. We need to use commas to set off parenthetical expressions. Here's an example. Climate change, so far as we know, is still debatable. The phrase in the middle is like a parenthesis, meaning it's not essential for the sentence to make sense. We also use commas to set off absolute phrases. The baseball game having finished, they all decided to go to a restaurant nearby. The absolute phrase at the beginning of the sentence must be separated by a comma. Let's talk about some places you do not want to use a comma. You do not want to use a comma to connect two sentences. For example, the profits for the year were better than last year. The company will be able to expand in the future. This is not correct. We have two complete sentences, but in English we cannot connect them with a comma. We need to write two complete sentences and place a period or a full stop at the end of the first sentence. Here's another example. The company president was away on a business trip. He will be back next week. Again, we have two complete sentences, so we cannot connect it with a comma. Let's talk about a few common mistakes that people make using a comma. We've already talked about these first three common mistakes: joining independent clauses with only a comma, forgetting to add a comma before an introductory element, no comma in a compound sentence. These are mistakes that are often made. Here are a few more. Do not use a comma to separate a verb from the subject or object. Here's an example. Companies that produce these parts are becoming more common. We do not want a comma between the subject, the word parts, and the verb are becoming. We talked about using commas in a list. However, another common mistake is to use a comma before the first or the last item in a list. Other causes are water pollution, air pollution, and soil pollution. We do not need a comma at the beginning of the list, as in this sentence. Some other common mistakes are to use a comma between cumulative adjectives, between an adjective and a noun, or between an adverb and an adjective. Let's talk about each of these. In the corner of the room was an old rocking chair. We talked about this earlier when talking about coordinate adjectives. Do not use a comma between an adjective and a noun, as in this sentence. It was a meaningless, boring lecture. Boring explains more about the lecture and needs to be connected to the word lecture without using a comma. And one more common mistake, using a comma between an adverb or an adjective. The restaurant is famous for amazingly delicious desserts. We do not need the comma in this sentence. I hope after watching this video you've learned how we use commas in English, as well as the places we do not need to use commas. Remember, punctuation is important. Be sure to use it correctly. Happy writing!